If you need proof this thing has whacked the economy, then these numbers tell at least part of the story. More than $5.3 billion has been paid out already from the wage subsidy. It is helping 876,000 people. There is also a database you can access now to see who's applied and who hasn't. Finance Minister Grant Robertson's back with us. Good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
What do you make of David Clark?
Hugely disappointing. I mean, New Zealanders right across the country are making big sacrifices as we do this level 4 lockdown, and ministers need to show leadership in that. He hasn't done that. It's really hugely disappointing for all New Zealanders. And you've seen the PM's reaction today. She's demoted him, and she's basically said that, if it weren't for the fact we were in the middle of a public health crisis, he would have been sacked.
If there was one person that you would have looked at and gone, nah, he's the clown to go rogue, would it have been him, or are you shocked?
I'm hugely disappointed. I've known David for a long time, and he's a dedicated health minister. He works very, very hard. I don't want to make excuses for him. He's a Presbyterian minister. He's got all sorts of things in his background that would make you hope that he would have, think of others and think of other people's situations. So I'm enormously disappointed in him. I know he's disappointed in himself, and he's let New Zealanders down because it's New Zealanders who are making the sacrifices, and he hasn't shown leadership.
All right, let's get back to your portfolio. Any sense of the number of layoffs so far? I mean, this is a lot of money and a lot of help, but how many people are getting laid off, do you know?
So the Ministry of Social Development is releasing that information on Thursday, so I don't have it at this stage, but we do know that there have been a number of layoffs. We can just look at Bauer and things like that to be able to pinpoint hundreds, and no doubt it's in the thousands. We've definitely cushioned that blow with the wage subsidy scheme, and as you said, 867,000 yesterday. That was yesterday morning's data. By the evening, I'm aware it went over $6 billion and more people. So it's having the effect we wanted of cushioning the blow, but clearly there are job losses out there as well.
By the time this is done, how much and how many people do you reckon this is worth, this wage subsidy?
So the estimate that the Treasury gave us at the start was somewhere between $8 and $12 billion. It's tracking along to be somewhere near the middle of that, or maybe just up around the $10 billion, I think, between 9 and 10. But that'll depend a little bit on the take-up from some quite large employers who have been working through how that works for them, and been pretty public in the case of Fletcher's as to how they're doing that. So I think we will clearly be well over the 1 million employees by the time we're done here.
That's more than 20% of the entire population.
That's right. But, in the end, Mike, that's why we did it, was to make sure that employers and employees stayed attached to each other through this period. It's a 12-week subsidy. It's paid in a lump sum. It gives a lot of flexibility to employers to be able to keep their staff on, to keep people in jobs as we move out of level 4. So, we set it up for a reason. I hate to use the word because in these circumstances it sounds weird, but it's actually been a success.
Yeah. The threshold, the safe harbour you talked of on Friday, and I don't think it's got enough coverage as yet, but what's the criteria? How much debt am I in? How much trouble am I in? And who decides whether I get protected or not?
So there's two clauses in the Companies Act, one around Section 135, which talks about reckless conduct, and I think actually arguably trading through this wouldn't necessarily be reckless because everybody knows the circumstances, but there's another clause that essentially, I think it's 136, that says that you need to be upfront essentially about what's happening. So the criteria we've looked at is around making sure that a business was basically going okay at the 31st of December last year, that it can show by looking at its books that it's all right, and that it has a conceivable plan to pay any debts that it's got through the next 18 months. But the really important thing here is that there needs to be conversations between companies and their creditors to make sure that the creditors know what's going on. But between those two, major criteria, that you basically were a going concern going in, right, and you've got a plan to be a going concern coming out. That's the basic criteria.
You mentioned the larger companies and dealing with them. Is there any possibility, and this has been floated, that you will end up taking a stake in some way, shape or form? You might lend the company money, and if they don't pay it back in time, you get a slice of the action, that the government might end up owning bits and pieces of large companies. Is that part of the thinking or not?
It's a possibility, Mike. I mean, the way we've set that an economically significant business unit up within the Treasury is we brought some outside commercial expertise in to support us, and we are looking at it from a commercial perspective. These are companies that should be able to trade on their own, and the government's got no particular desire to own parts of them. But we want to keep options on the table around what particular type of financing arrangement we might be part of. So potentially there could be the kind of convertible loan type arrangement you're alluding to. I think our first preference remains, if we need to be involved, it's more in the nature of bridging finance or a commercial loan. But if we need to, and these are truly economically significant businesses that matter to the operations of New Zealand or a very important sector of that, then obviously we want to keep all the options on the table. But it's looking at it from a commercial perspective in the first instance.
On a regionality issue, so say you loosen a region, Prime Minister talking about this yesterday, say you take an area like Taranaki, you loosen it, you lower it to 3 or 2, whatever the case may be. How do you protect the borders of Taranaki?
Yeah, that's one of the things that has to be worked through now to make sure that, obviously that would involve a significant role for the police to make sure that they were there for regional councils to be able to understand that. But you're right, that is exactly one of the issues that makes regional step downs quite challenging. Clearly, they would be easier in more isolated areas where you kind of know how people get in. If you stick it in the middle of the North Island and you've got 4 different directions that people are coming from, that would be harder. So regional step downs would have to be ones that would be more easily managed than I think would be the case in a lot of places. But it's in the menu of options for us around how we can start to get things back to normal, because we've all got a desire to get out of level 4 as soon as possible, and we need to have all the options on how to do that on the table.
Good on you. Nice to talk as always. Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister with us.